So Osho is coming back. Yes, this is my belief. This is what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling in the world. You know, and by that, you know, just to get it clear, I don't mean that he's going to physically rematerialize on the planet, but that would be pretty cool. But rather that, you know, that his influence and his teaching and his sheer presence is re-emerging some 25, 30 years after he passed on out in the world. For those of you who don't know who I'm talking about when I say the word Osho, to be clear, he was the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh during his lifetime, an Indian mystic from the 70s and 80s predominantly, died in 1990, and whose, you know, his presence on the earth was pure rebellion to me. It was pure rebellion, but from the heart. From the heart, not about fighting the system all the time and that kind of thing, you know, in your teenage mind trip, but actually from the heart. And he stood up, this little guy, like 5 foot tall, stood up in complete opposition, if he felt it, to all of the governments, to the Indian government, to the American government in particular, to the British and European governments, and just said his truth, you know, to religion. He totally opposed virtually all religion, absolutely hammered it from the word go. Courted controversy at every opportunity and attracted something like 50 to 100,000 followers called sannyasins or neo-sannyasins at the time. So this was an amazing character, one of the most influential people of the 20th century who has been largely dropped in some ways by society. And certainly, you know, living in an Osho community, the last one really in the UK of any size. I've been here for about, Osho Lila, I've been here for about 16 years. You know, there's a diminution of interest over time, you know, everyone's kind of seen it and done it and heard it, and they moved on to different stuff. And that, I guess, is normal with movements, you know, with stuff that comes out, with tribes that emerge. They have their, especially when they're led by one person, the person passes away and things start to go down, you expect it. But recently, there's been a lot of revived interest, and I'm really feeling that myself. There's just much more interest in Osho, and I really feel he is coming back. One of the big kind of, in fact, there was a, you know, we regularly have Osho weekends where it's just pure Osho meditation stuff. And generally it's only old people that come. And now younger people are starting to come. They're getting interested again. Who was this man and what did he do? You know, who was this God of the rebels, the king of rebellion, you know? Because he was a major influence on my life and I never even met him. Because I couldn't believe at some point that some little guy this tall could stand up and speak his truth to 100,000 people and absolutely ignore the American government and what it thought, and absolutely ignore what the, you know, all the European governments thought, all the Indian government thought, who stood up to all the religious leaders and just spoke his truth. No concern for their comeback, and they killed him. Chances are the American government, the general popular theory, killed him. They poisoned him with thallium or something like this was the theory, you know. But he didn't care, you know. He just stood up and did it. And that is a quality that is fucking rare on this planet, you know, because like I live in the UK, people complain a lot, you know. That's our default thing. We complain about the system, but we're never going to really stand up and speak our truth, you know. And he stood up and spoke his truth. And when I saw him doing that, you know, live on video and stuff, or on video, you know, I just thought, shit, this guy's got some balls, and if he can do it, I can start to do it. I had the same feeling when I met Varesh, who I did meet in person, who was a big Osho follower and a big fan of Osho, who started his own community in Holland. And, you know, this guy just stood up, you know, he stood up and did it, regardless of what was going on in the political scene, regardless of all the mind fucks and all the conditionings. He just did it, and that I admire, and that I try and do in my own life as much as I feel I can, to stretch myself out and take a position. The main kind of reason why people marginalise Osho, I think, and why, you know, even though he had a huge impact on therapy and personal development, a lot of the most talented therapists who developed in that hotbed of energy that was circulating around him in the 70s and 80s dropped sannyas, dropped their Osho name, took up their old name and went back out in the world to become therapists because they didn't want to be tarnished with the associations, which I understand, you know. But, you know, the main thing that he really bought in, I lost a thread, well, the main judgment put against him was that he was a cult leader, you know, that it was a cult that he was running. And what I would say is, yeah, but so fucking what, you know? So fucking what? I was born in a cult. I lived most of my life in a cult called Britain, basically. A cult, you know, that's got all the attributes of any kind of cult, because that's what any mass movement of people is, essentially, is a cult. You know, I was brought up in an environment where essentially you had to go to school and learn a load of stuff you weren't really interested in for 15 years. And then you had to go and get a job and get married, have kids, and just, you know, work your life away. And then you could, you know, consume alcohol or get wasted on weed, get in fights every weekend to try and release for stuff. And this was the cult I was brought up in. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, it's not the worst cult I can imagine in the world. I'm sure there's been, in the history of cults, there have been worse cults than British culture in the 80s and 90s. But it's still pretty fucking shit, if I'm honest about it. And most people watching this will probably agree who know what Britain is. It's pretty crap. You know, you don't really get much of a result out of this cult. So in the overall kind of cult marketplace, you know, when I look around and I look at Osho, okay, what would you get out of that cult? When I became a sannyasin in 2000, I think, and an Osho follower got my name originally Amira, and then that was changed to Devaraj by Varesh, who incidentally thought that Amira wasn't a tough enough name for me. And that I could take a big position in the world. So he called me Devaraj. I lost my track a little bit. Cults. So, you know, basically when I started to get involved in the sannyas movement, what I saw was, and what attracted me was, there was a lot of, you know, there was a lot of heart and juicy people in it. It wasn't expensive like a lot of therapy was. You know, they were putting on workshops where you could clear your stuff up, where you could make new friendships, where I could meet women, you know, who were kind of interested in sex, as opposed to just kind of seem to be just acting through some societal trip like it was growing up in Essex and London, you know. So to me, this was a major result, you know. So what? It's a fucking cult, you know. Everything's a cult. This, at least to me, was like a good cult. And the reality was I'd also, to a degree, dropped out of society in my early 20s and kind of gone back, dropped out, gone back, got out. So it wasn't such a big thing for me to jump out of a societal groove. So if you're watching this video, it's not that I urge you to check out Osho or urge you to become a sannyasin or urge you to go and listen to his teachings, his discourses online and that kind of thing. What I urge you to do is to do your own thing. Do your own thing. Think your own truth and move forwards. You know, do not simply follow this cultural bullshit that you've been brought up in. You've been brought up in a cult. I guarantee it. You're brought up in a cult, and the chances are it's a pretty fucking shit cult. You know, and the reality is it's declining in influence. You know, it is. Western culture, the power that it had in the 50s, you know, is declined. It's changing. We're becoming more global, whatever. There's decentralization going on. But if you're still caught up in the whole belief system of the mass media and the world out there, and have a look where you still buy into the whole myth and the bullshit, do you keep yourself small? You know, do you stand up and speak your truth when you need to? Are you willing to accept that you can't? You know, are you willing to find a way to move forwards, to do it, to recognize that you're on this earth and you have a birthright to stand up and take a position? This is what it's about. And this to me is what sannyas and Osho was about. And it's not that you have to get pictures of Osho and worship him, but that's what he stood up for. And that's what I would like you, if you're watching this video, to stand up for. Because we're here, all of us, to support each other and to move deeper and to move forwards. What I saw with young guys, you know, growing up is we're all in this competitive thing and we're all putting each other down all the time. And some way it's kind of, it's okay, it's a part of our nature, but we can also support each other a lot more, to stand up and go deeper. So, you know, take this video if you can as some form of inspiration. I can assure you, if you are alive right now, you have the absolute right to stand up and do your own thing. It's as simple as that. It's an inalienable right, given at a very deep level. Very deep level. And the culture you're living in only exists because it starts, at least on some degree, to allow that right to exist. That's why Western capitalism beat communism. Communism didn't give enough potential for the individual to develop. So chump, it got the chop. You know, it was not the commies versus the capitalists. It's the deeper meaning of life. I'm not going to call it God. It's the deeper meaning of existence. It's here to facilitate your change. And if you buy into a regime, or if you look at a regime, say like Western capitalism, which has been very exploitative, you know, it's exploited the shit out of people, it still knows, and at the top of the culture they know, if person wants enough freedom enough and they're willing to go deep enough inside themselves to get it, they can get it. And if a culture didn't allow that, that culture would not survive. It's an inalienable principle inside all forms of cult, culture, whatever is going on. What survives, you have to at least give lip service to the individual. You have to, you know, and that's how Western capitalism, consumerism has survived so long, because it does still allow that, even if it doesn't facilitate it, even if it doesn't push it, even if it doesn't really make it easy, even if it gives you loads of options to get wasted all the time, or babble complaining nonsense, or whine like some kind of bitch about immigrants and stuff like that, and generally not step up. It gives you loads of excuses, but nevertheless, if you want it, you can get it. There are no excuses. You have an inalienable right to stand up, speak your truth, and move forwards in life. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about Osho. You know, he was my master. He is my master. Yeah, and that's me. It's a part of me. You know, I listen to him every day. I'm listening to a Bull Mystic series at the moment, and it's incredibly deep and powerful. I'm not urging you to do the same, but I'm saying you have a right to stand up and take a position for yourself, and I'd like you to enact that right. You can do it. Okay, message over.